All right, here we go. We Black Live back and in full effect on Wednesdays. How you guys doing? This is Narnique Grant, your co-host for Race and Races. We are back on our Wednesday cycle. We are here with Representative Omari Hardy, who is running for the District 20 race. But before we let him start, we're going to let Sandra go ahead and introduce herself. Okay, so I am a former candidate for school board. I am a advocate, really for my people. I am a mom of 5, and really passionate about our people being part of the political process. And so this is why this show was birthed. So I'm going to send it over to my co-host so she can introduce herself, and then we're going to go straight in to speak to Representative Omari Hardy.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra Sheffer. I'm one of the co-hosts of Race and the Races. I'm also the president of the Democratic Women's Club of Greater Broward, but I'm here today in my capacity as a co-host of Race and the Races. I'm a practicing attorney and a professor at a local college, and I just love all things race and politics, and that's why, I'm here doing this. We have the honor, the absolute pleasure tonight to speak to Omari Hardy, who is I think you're probably one of the youngest candidates in the race. So we're here, to talk to him today to see what his vision is for District 20. And it's going to be a wonderful conversation, and just join us.
Well, may I?
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Right. Well, first off, thank y'all for inviting me on here. So yes, I am Representative Omari Hardy, and I am serving currently in the Florida House of Representatives. I'll just take you back, though. I grew up in Broward. I grew up in Lauderdale Manors. My mom taught at Dillard for many, many years. I have 2 moms. So my mom's partner, my bonus mom, she was also an educator. That runs in the family. My parents are educators. My grandmother was an educator before retiring after 30 plus years. And my great grandmother, Miss Ruby Watson, she founded one of the first pre-K schools for Black children in Fort Lauderdale. Across the street from Old Dillard, the Old Dillard Museum, which is the site of, where Walker Elementary is today. So right across the street from there. So born and raised in South Florida, went to the University of Miami, got a degree in economics. And, when I moved up to Lake Worth Beach up here in Palm Beach County, and started teaching, I obviously follow, the footsteps of, my mom. But in addition to that, I discovered, a little something in the town of Lake Worth Beach. If you're not familiar with it, Lake Worth is a town. It's over 100 years old. It was founded by 2 former slaves, Fannie and Sam James. And the town today has a minority population. About 65% of the residents are non-white. We're talking African American, Caribbean American, Guatemalan Mayan, Mexican American. And yet when I moved there was not one person of color on the dais. Mm-hmm. And Dixie Highway was the dividing line in the city. On the east side of Dixie Highway, you had largely white neighborhoods, which were much more affluent, closer to the water. And then on the west side of Dixie Highway, you have where folks of color lived. And I promise you, when I moved there were miles and miles of unpaved roads, specifically in the Black community. This is an urban Palm Beach County. We're talking an 8-10 minute drive maximum away from Mar-a-Lago, but that's how segregated the town was, and that's how underserved our communities of color were. So, I got upset. I ran for office. I won by 18 votes. Don't let anybody tell you that your vote doesn't matter. It absolutely does. Exactly. Look, if your vote didn't matter, the Republicans wouldn't be trying to steal it from you with all this voter suppression legislation. And I started serving on the city commission there. And that was my first introduction in a realistic way to government. Again, I was a teacher, primarily a civics teacher. And so you have all the textbook stuff, but when you serve in local government, you learn a lot about how the government works and about how politics work, obviously, that you can never learn from a textbook. And what was so interesting to me is that here in this town, that most of the residents are working class and people of color. You have folks who talked a good game, who talked about the concern that they had for the underserved folks in our community. And yet every time they had an opportunity to do something for our working class, for our immigrant community, for our Black community, they found some excuse not to do it, some excuse to fall short of the mark where we really should have been pressing. And so during the time that I served there, I came in with, very high hopes and a belief in the system. And by the time that I left, I realized that the perception of politics that the average person has about being, primarily a disagreement between an established class who benefits from the status quo and who doesn't want that to change, and an underclass that needs that status quo to change in order to gain basic recognition and respect and dignity in the workplace and so on. That perception, I think, matches the reality, not just at the local level, but during my time in the state legislature, I think it certainly matches what I saw there, not just with the Republicans versus the Democrats, but with folks within our party, within our caucus, who were all too willing to compromise with Republicans on issues that we had no business compromising with them on. And so, my time during Lake Worth Beach serving locally was about standing up for the immigrant community, standing up for people of color, for working class folks, for more affordable housing, and so on. And my time in the legislature was very much the same thing, but obviously, it's a target-rich environment because the Republicans are so drunk with power that they push a lot of bad ideas up there, including House Bill 1, or Hate Bill 1, as we like to call it, which was a direct attack on our First Amendment rights, including the voter suppression legislation that we mentioned earlier, and all the other giveaways that they give to big businesses and large corporations here in the state of Florida. So my entire career has been about serving folks in the classroom, for serving my community in the civic space as a public official, as an elected official, and of fighting for the little guy, and of trying to make sure that working class folks and people of color get what they deserve from our government, which is much more than they've been getting all this time.
Wonderful. Awesome. So you mentioned that you started off in education, and then you worked your way to city commissioner, and now you are state rep.
Yes.
So as you know, we've interviewed a few other candidates prior to you.
It can be tough. Yeah.
Oh, really?
I'm in the hot seat.
And we've asked, we try to ask some of the questions that are tailored to you guys and what you promote and advocate, right? So one of my questions I have is that, and I asked a couple of the candidates, is my major concern is your poorest cities in your district, right? And one of and I know that my co-host shares this concern about the farmers' money, work, and how are you, if you were to win this seat, what would be some of the steps you take for cities like Pahokee, Belglade, that are extremely impoverished? What are some of the steps you would take to get those cities out of the poverty level that we have there?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you for asking me. So, little known fact, Lake Worth Beach, where I started out, is actually the second poorest city in the county. The only city with a higher poverty rate is Pahokee in Palm Beach County, and right behind Lake Worth is Belglade and South Bay. So I'm familiar serving in a community that has a lot of needs, that has been basically suffering from a lack of investment. And I think the first thing is you have to invest in the community's human capacity. You have to invest in the human potential of the individuals who live there. And that starts with education and workforce training. And I know that some of that is already underway, but I think much more of that is needed, in particular around the early childhood learning piece. It's extremely important because you have folks out in the glades who have been there for generations, but you also have migrant workers who are out there and who are now settling there. And so the demographic is changing a little bit, but we have to continue to do outreach to these folks in these communities and make sure that we're providing them with the educational resources they need. Also, I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact that agriculture is like the #1 job creator out in the glades. And I think that folks in the glades could benefit from some diversification in that respect. Everybody is dependent on the large agriculture companies, U.S. Sugar and Florida Crystals and so on, for their jobs and their livelihoods. And I think it's important that we make investments there to diversify that. One of the interesting things is there's a highway called US 27, and there's been talk for many years about including a railway along US 27, which would go to the Glades. This would take a lot of freight traffic off of our inner cities in coastal South Florida, right? So basically you can run the freight that comes out of the port of Miami up US 27. that way and get to the center of the state, as opposed to going up the East Coast and making traffic worse in downtown Miami and Fort Lauderdale and so on and so forth. But what that would do is it would also create an opportunity to create jobs in the Glades with a multimodal transportation center, which would be necessary to do something like that, which obviously would not be tied to agriculture. So I think that's a positive thing. But more broadly, I really believe in this idea of a Green New Deal. And that idea is that we are facing a serious existential crisis in climate change. This is a challenge not just to people in South Florida, to Americans, but to the human race, right? And we should not allow this crisis to go to waste. So as we adjust and adapt to climate change and restructure our economy so that we're using energy more efficiently and using clean energy so that we're reversing climate change, as we do all that, we should try to find a way to restructure the economy so that it works around working class people. And in particular, we should do it in a way so that folks who have been traditionally left out, like our rural communities, can get the biggest possible benefit from that. And so we have seen Representative Ocasio-Cortez propose a Green New Deal for public housing. We've seen Representative Cori Bush propose a Green New Deal for cities, which again is all about equity in addressing the climate change crisis. We saw former educator Jamal Bowman introduce a Green New Deal for public schools. I think we need a Green New Deal for the Glades. I think we need a Green New Deal for agriculture that basically uses this opportunity of climate change to figure out how can we lower the emissions of the agricultural sector. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention sugarcane burning as a part of that. But that does these things in a way that can actually obviously keep the jobs that people have there and create additional jobs, right? So one of the things that I would like to do is to add to that complement of legislation by proposing a Green New Deal for agriculture here in the United States that would certainly benefit residents out in the Glades. And again, the role there is to protect the jobs that people have and to build on that economic base and make sure that folks who have been left out traditionally are finally being put first by policy that's coming out of Washington, D.C.
Okay. You have another question? Because I have a couple. I'm going to take you back a little bit, though. Okay, yes. So one of the things that when you were doing your introductions, one of the things that you said is that, you saw time and time again of folks who were elected, to serve communities. They didn't do something, right? They didn't do something. I want to know what's that something, and what opportunities do you think they've missed in order for them to help communities, migrant communities, poor communities? You said they didn't do something. Yeah. Something? Yeah. What opportunities have been missed?
Yeah, I will give you 3 examples. One of which I lost on, 2 of which I was able to succeed on. Right. So one of the things that I wanted to do in Lake Worth Beach was to provide community IDs for folks in the immigrant community. People who are not familiar with Lake Worth Beach, we have one of the largest Guatemalan Mayan populations in the country. The New York Times actually came to Lake Worth Beach because after folks cross the border, they kind of have to report where they're going. And Lake Worth Beach ended up in like the top 10, along with, major cities in the United States. And again, we're a small town, 7 square miles, 38,000 people officially, right? So someone wanted to figure out, well, what's going on here? We have a huge immigrant community, and they're not really represented very well by most of the folks who were serving there, when I was there. And so, working with legal aid, we put this community ID thing on the agenda because, as you may know, undocumented immigrants very often get arrested for stuff that you or I might get a ticket for because they don't have identification. The reason that they don't have identification is because they don't have the documents to go to the state of Florida, like a birth certificate or so on, which, is a part of their legal status. They're undocumented. They don't have a birth certificate here from the United States because this isn't where they were born, right? So legal aid came to us with this community ID program, and, we're sitting on the board with some Republicans. Our mayor's a Republican, and she did not even want to allow us to vote for it. She talked about how she cared about the immigrant community, about how she understands that these folks are victimized by people. They can't open bank accounts. Sometimes they can't get into the gated communities that they need to do the landscaping work and so on and so forth. They get arrested for stuff we get ticketed for, but she would still stop short of even allowing us to vote on this community ID package so that folks can get this kind of thing that can help them live a more normal life in the United States. And so I had to count my votes on the dais at that time and make a motion to override the mayor just to get a vote on that community ID program. And even though we helped create the program. We're one of the 3 cities in Palm Beach County that does it, and that's provided IDs to over 3,000 undocumented immigrants here, likely undocumented immigrants here in Palm Beach County. We still, and when I say we, I mean Lake Worth, refuse to put money on the table to help with this effort, right? So when you talk about talking a good game, saying you support the immigrant community, and then having this huge gap between what you say and what you do, that's what I'm talking about. And it's extremely frustrating because clearly we had the ability to do something, but people make excuses in their own mind for why they have to stop short of what's right for working class folks, for marginalized communities. So that's one example. One that I lost.
No, I don't want to. Okay, I know you said 3, but I have some follow-up questions on the one.
Go ahead.
About. So one of the so I want to know, who is it that issues those ID? Is it something that the county issues? Because I don't think you can get the state of Florida to do that. But if you
okay, right, yeah. So it's the Legal Aid Society, and the way that they structure it is really intelligent. Obviously, pretty much any document that a public employee comes into contact with becomes to some degree a public record, right? So we could not have the city or Palm Beach County government or the other 2 cities that are participating in this program do that, because when undocumented immigrants provide us the kind of compromise documentation that we need to verify that they are who they say they are, they live where they say they live. Well, if we take that, then it becomes a public record, and now ICE can come and do public records requests and use this to track down the immigrants who we're trying to help with this program. So what we did was we gave and it was 3 cities agreed that pretty much legal aid would administer the program, and not even legal aid would retain the documentation. They would view the documentation, and then basically they would mail something to the person's address to verify that it was them, and then they would get them the ID that way, right?
That was generated by legal aid.
And right, it's administered by legal aid.
Okay.
It's a community ID program, and the individual cities that are participating pass resolutions saying that we will accept these IDs for purposes of obtaining city services like water, or in Lake Worth Beach case, electric, for signing your child up for recreational services and programs and so on, right? Or in the case of the police, that the police department, we don't have a police department in Lake Worth Beach. We contract out with the sheriff because we're very small and we have limited financial resources. But West Palm Beach, which is also participating in the program, their police officers will accept this as valid identification. So when they pull someone over for, for example, running a stop sign, and you don't have a driver's license, well, you might get a notice to appear if you're you or me, you have some other kind of identification, right? But if you're an undocumented immigrant, you don't have any identification, they don't know who you are, they're not able to verify that. So very often they arrest you and book you, which then gets you.
But they should get arrested, right? Okay, so I don't mean to cut you off, because I'm an immigration attorney, and I'm hearing all of this stuff, and I'm seeing what the problems are and why it is that they don't have the necessary documentation, right? So first of all, if you don't have like any ID, you shouldn't be driving, right? Because at the very least, they, there's some folks that can have international driver's license, right? So they can have an international driver's license that would allow them to drive. So if they're driving and running stop signs and they don't have the proper documentation, then you shouldn't have been driving. And I should get a ticket too if I'm driving a car and I don't have,
Here's what we should do. We should allow undocumented immigrants to get driver's licenses, so that this kind of thing doesn't happen.
All right, so let me say, I'm sorry. Right. I'm going to speak to that point too, right? So part of the reason, and I'm telling you, part of the reason why some of those undocumented immigrants don't have identification is because they probably entered without inspection, meaning that they didn't make any contact with any immigration official. Right. And then once they got here, for whatever reason, and I'm not judging because I do immigration defense work, so I understand it, they don't present themselves, or they don't submit any documentations that would allow them to get some sort of status, or because so allow them to get at least an identification. Because if you file for some sort of relief from immigration, whatever it is, you're going to get a receipt, and you're going to at least be able to apply for an ID that would allow you to, get a driver's license, get a social security number. So some of that, the conversation that's happening here is like, what's your position on immigration, right? Because the way to really resolve that issue is some level of like immigration reform, right? And then there was also a piece about they don't have ID to get into these communities where they're working. So if they're working, that means that they're working without authorization. Because if they had work authorization, they would be allowed to get identification in order to allow them to work. So I'm not taking away from the program because they should have something that identifies them. However, part of the reason why someone will, and I'm not saying I have that resistance, but part of the reason someone may have that resistance is because if they did let immigration know that they were here, they would be able to have some sort of documentation that would allow them to get a driver's license and or have papers that will allow them to work.
Right. But the reason why they're not letting immigration know that they're here is because they're afraid of being deported because they crossed illegally, because our immigration system is insane. And it's the very same people, very often Trump supporters, whose grandparents or great grandparents came here. How? They got on a boat in Italy, they got on a boat somewhere in Europe, came over to Ellis Island, presented themselves, signed some piece of paper, and it's fine. But that's not good. Our immigration system is significantly more complex than that today. You can't just do that today. And so it's very, very difficult to immigrate. And also, it's unfortunately a criminal infraction to basically enter the country without, going through the appropriate processes. And I agree with Julian Castro that basically we need to turn that into a civil matter, not a criminal matter. I think one of the themes that you'll see with local government is that people like myself who served in local government before coming into the Florida legislature, we have to deal with problems that are everyday problems, but they're really symptoms of larger systemic issues that we lack the power to address. Yeah, and it's one of the reasons why I'm running for Congress, because we need more systemic solutions to these problems. We shouldn't have the 400 local governments in the state of Florida creating community IDs for undocumented immigrants. We need to rationalize our immigration system to make it easier for folks to immigrate. It's good for America to have an influx of people into this country who are coming here for the same reason that if you are not Black, our parents came here, or if you are not, an immigrant or, Caribbean, a lot of Americans came here. They're descended from folks who wanted to live a better life and came to America because we were that beacon of light, that shining city on a hill. And we're making it difficult, in particular for brown people and Black folk from the global South. When I say that, I mean Latin America, I mean Africa, I mean Middle East, Asia, so on, to do that because our immigration system is fundamentally racist, and we have to address that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running.
Yeah, and I understand that. I'm an immigrant myself. My parents are immigrant. I used to say I'm the child of immigrant. No, I'm not only a child of immigrant. I'm an immigrant myself, right? I came to the United States from the Bahamas, from Haitian parents. So I do understand the struggle. And I just wanted to keep it clear, like why it is that some of those things are happening. And that issue becomes complicated because, the issue really stems from what's a person's position on immigration, especially illegal immigration, and what that looks like. So thank you for that. And you did say it was 3 things. And so can you tell us the other 2? My apologies.
Well, yeah, I'll just be very brief, right? One that I lost. I believe that there's this movement called the Civil Gideon movement, right? And so Gideon versus Wainwright, criminal defendants got the ability to have representation even if they weren't charged with a capital crime, right? Which was the case before, Gideon Wainwright, right? Okay, so the Civil Gideon movement basically says, well, gosh, people are really dealing with important issues in civil court as well. You got issues with child custody. You have issues with evictions and things like that. And we really have a responsibility to poor and working class people who cannot afford to pay hundreds of dollars an hour to an attorney throughout these cases to make sure that they have representation so that their life isn't ruined by how a legal proceeding turns out that may have turned out differently if they simply had access to representation, right? So where I think that is most important and most pressing today is in housing. Over 90% of landlords who are filing to evict people, they come to court with attorneys. And fewer than 15% of the tenants come to court with attorneys. Obviously, that is an unfair playing field. And in particular, when you're dealing with the immigrant community, as is the case in Lake Worth, it's not fair to have someone who went to 3 years of law school, passed the bar, and has experience practicing in a given field of law going up against a woman whose 12-year-old daughter is translating for her in eviction court. That's not right. That's not fair. And so one of the things that I did was I tried to come up with a program because in Lake Worth, we unfortunately have a lot of absentee slum landlords. And they really abuse their tenants by renting, overpriced, really run down, apartments and stuff to them. And, the proposal that I had was let's find a way to when we find these landlords through the code enforcement process, and when we collect their fine, don't have that money go back into the city's general fund. We should segregate that money and then make it available to tenants in the city who are facing eviction so that they can obtain representation through legal aid. That way they don't show up to court without an attorney. That way they have to keep the landlord honest. And that way, hopefully, we can get the landlord into a situation where he's maybe going to mediation instead of pursuing a judgment against the tenant, which stays on your record for a long time. Folks look at that, right? And so, that was something. I had the head housing attorney from Legal Aid there. She waited 2 hours to give that presentation. And as soon as that agenda item came up, my colleague, Scott Maxwell, who is a racist Republican, basically tabled the item before we could even explain it, right? And so that's an example of, again, they say that they really want to help these families. They say that they're for working class people, but every time you have an opportunity to do something, we have to drag you kicking and screaming if we can drag you at all. Now, the good thing is, after that situation in last year with, people's utilities being cut off and me having a fit about that in our city commission meeting, because that was completely and utterly unacceptable that the city was cutting off people's utilities as the pandemic was starting and folks were losing their job. After that, a majority of the council lost their reelection. And so we have a new group of people in there, and they just appropriated $50,000 to fund legal counsel for families facing eviction because it's a new day in the city. And because they recognize that folks should not be kicked out of their homes without having a fair playing field in the court of law.
So is that something that the county itself is going to provide counsel, or they're providing that $50,000 to legal aid? Because legal aid charges on a sliding scale. So if a person is able, so is that to fund a position in legal aid, or
yes, that basically funds like a dedicated attorney for families in Lake Worth that are facing eviction, and legal aid. It's a reimbursable thing, so they reimburse us as they do the work. And again, that idea was unheard of, in Lake Worth before that. But I was the only person on the dais who was a renter who kind of understood that, and also I'd worked for an affordable housing provider, so I kind of understood what was going on there. And I felt that we should broach that idea. And so it took 2 tries. I wasn't able to accomplish it while I was there, but I was able to lay a groundwork for those who came after me to do that. But again, it just shows the resistance that people have to doing things that would help working class folks in a tangible way.
Yeah, and that's part of it. That's why elections matter, and who you give this power to, it absolutely matter who you give the power to, because they're going to make decisions. Maybe it's something that they don't understand or they can't relate to that experience. So you need to have true diversity on these council. And the diversity is not only about color; it's about experience, race, class, gender. Working, all of that. All of that is part of the diversity that's necessary.
So may I talk a little bit about diversity, because there's a pet peeve that I have about diversity.
What's the pet peeve?
What's the pet peeve?
I want to see people who look like me in positions of power, but it has to be more than black faces in high places, right? And I think sometimes we get elected officials who look like us, who have our experiences, but when it comes down to their decision making, they are not really looking out for us. And representation has to go deeper than what the person looks like. It has to go deeper than the descriptions that might attach to that person when you read their biography. We really have to realize that we have a class problem in America, and it spans racial categories, it spans gender categories. And the fact of the matter, I know a lot of black folks whose black elected officials as well, whose racial politics are woke, but whose class politics are dead sleep. Yeah. And we have to address that. We can do well for people of color who are business owners and professionals and so on and so forth. But if you are not as focused on the lady who's clocking in every day at Burger King, who's making below the minimum wage, or who's making a minimum wage that should be higher, who doesn't have health care, who doesn't have child care, who can't find adequate early childhood learning for her young children, right? Like that is where our focus needs to be on the Black masses of people who are struggling against a system that has basically allowed massive wealth inequality. We have a climate crisis that is caused by people who are getting wealthy off of fossil fuels and things like that. We need to address those issues. As the representation, we have to go deeper than just skin color, gender, race, so on, so on.
Ideology is all of it too.
It's got to be about it.
Ideology is a big part of it. Absolutely. All right, you can go with the next questions. I have a couple, but I'll go ahead.
No, you go ahead with one of yours, because I have one that's concerning gun violence, and I want to know if your gun violence, that's one of your tiers on your website. Does this gun violence talk more? Is it a general look at gun violence, or is it one looking at our communities?
I mean, so, gun violence is a multifaceted problem. There's a, it's not a laughing topic.
They have a Second Amendment right to bear arms.
Yeah, but well, look, it's not a funny topic, but I'm thinking about a stand-up skit that J. Anthony Brown did about 15 years ago. Talking about, white parents not knowing what their kids are up to. Like, oh my gosh, he's building a bomb and I had no idea, right? And, I couldn't make a sandwich in my mom's house without permission. But, we don't have in our community the kinds of mass shootings, for example, that we have seen occur throughout the country that are tragic. They make the national news. They capture the attention of the entire country because of how horrific and intense and concentrated the violence is, right? When you lose nearly 20 people in Parkland, when you lose 50 people in Pulse, when you lose 14 people at that church in Texas, when you lose folks at that church in Charlotte, which was perpetrated by a white supremacist, that captivates the nation attention because the violence and the tragedy is so concentrated. But in America, we have a mass shooting in the Black community every single day. 26 Black people are dying from gun violence every single day. And the root causes of that are different from the mass shootings that we see that have happened, unfortunately, twice in the state of Florida, right? And so what I really firmly believe is that we have to treat gun violence like a public health crisis, because that is exactly what it is. We have people suffering from mental illness who don't have access to health care. They need that. We have people who are engaged in activities that we have made to be underground activities by, prosecuting this war on drugs and making, what really would be entrepreneurs be basically criminals, right? So now we've got a whole black market and stuff and all the violence that comes with that. And, it's very funny. We're going through a pandemic, but violence in the Black community with respect to gun violence looks a lot like a communicable disease, because someone is getting killed. And next thing you know, the violence multiplies. Why? Because that person's family members want to seek retribution, or their friends or their cohorts want to seek retribution. And really what we need is to treat that almost like a test and trace situation, which is what they did in Chicago when they were wrapping their hands around this crisis. When they were actually making some leeway, they hired violence interrupters, right? These were people who had credibility out on the streets, who had lived that life, and who knew everybody, right? And who, when a shooting occurred, they were able to get to the bottom of it. Okay, who did it? And they were able to approach the parties and mediate before the violence multiplied, right? So that's a solution that's not going to stop a pulse.
Yeah, and that sounds like something that's dealing with a symptom, right? That sounds like that solution. And I'm not saying it's not important. Sure. Maybe you got to attack it on all different levels.
Yes,
but when
you
you're getting the violence interrupters, you're dealing with the symptom, right?
Yes.
Like, let's get to the root of this problem and really do some stuff that's going to make a difference.
Well, the root of the problem is that we're prosecuting a war on drugs that is turning what should be a legal business activity into an underground illegal activity. And so we are allowing gangs and all these things to proliferate because that's the only way to engage, for example, in cannabis commerce and so on in states that have not legalized recreational marijuana. And we are creating the kind of criminal activity that we don't want to have. The root problem is us criminalizing the use, possession, and distribution of drugs, when we really should be providing healthcare to people who are addicted to substances, who have a substance use disorder, and legalizing medical and recreational marijuana, and doing so in a way that will allow small business owners to participate in that kind of business or industry or environment. Right now in the state of Florida, it costs millions of dollars to get a permit to be a licensed operator for medical marijuana. And we don't have any black licensees either. And they require you also to be vertically integrated. So you can't just do what many small business owners do, sign a lease, open up a storefront, get product, get inventory, market that to your community. You can't do that. You have to own the farm. Well, you don't have to own the farm, but you have to operate the farm. You have to operate the distribution network, and you have to operate the retail network. No small business person is going to be able to do that, right? And so that, when I look at a lot of gun violence in the Black community, a lot of that goes right to the war on drugs. So yes, violence interruption, that is addressing a symptom. The root cause is addressing the war on drugs, which is functioned primarily as a perpetual stimulus program for law enforcement. That's really all it is.
Yeah. So there's some shift on that too, because there's some shift on, because I think right now the pharmaceutical companies are the real drug dealers that are in the community. What's happening is that people are on like drugs that are more addictive, and so crimes are, and then they're making it harder for the people to get those drugs, and then that's causing a crime. Like in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe some parts of 2000, yes, it was truly the dope boys, and that's the reason for the gun violence. Now, no, I think it's the pharmaceutical companies that got people hooked on Percocet, Oxy, all of these things, and then there's violence that's coming as a result of that, right? And so I think it's a little bit of shift, and then I don't know too many marijuana smokers that are violent and that's going around shooting folks. So I don't like to make that connection between the gun violence.
It's the dealers.
Marijuana.
It's the dealers who have a turf, who have a business they want to protect. And this is not an above board licensed business where
even with the dealers, I'm not going to say this the marijuana dealers that's doing that, but that's just my little thing. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, look,
you can't condone none of that behavior. So
I don't begrudge anybody. Look, if you're addicted to substances, then you need to seek medical treatment. Unfortunately, we have nearly 30 million people in America who don't have any health care. So that's a problem. But with respect to the marijuana dealers outside of a college campus, ain't no dope dealer selling just marijuana, right? You're selling the other stuff as well. And in Lake Worth Beach, we had a huge problem with that. We had 10 overdoses in one day in 2016 in Palm Beach County, and the medical examiner put out a tweet saying, "Look, there's something bad out on the streets right now. Like, don't go get it." And again, it is a medical disorder. It is an addiction, right? And so what did people do? They actually flocked to Lake Worth to get what folks were dying from because they knew it was strong, right? So I agree. We got to address the systemic issues that are creating this underground crime, and that starts with decriminalization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I agree with that too. And I know in Broward County, they had an issue with this drug called Flocka. That people would, it was just, and even, the state attorney, the police, they're like, listen, you come with we will put you in rehab because this one is just that bad. Right. So there was a time where that was a particular issue. And I guess even the drug addicts were like, Flocka's too much. And they kind of left that one alone. But, definitely thanks for that part of the conversation. And the issue of dealing with guns and how there's going to be some level of gun control, that's a tough one. That's absolutely a tough one. For me, a person who don't think people need 7 guns, grenades, and all that stuff, I think it's pretty simple. But, again, folks in the United States do have a constitutional right to bear arms and own weapons. And it's going to be difficult to get them to not do that.
Well, women have a constitutional right to choose, but we've seen how the Supreme Court has treated that. And so I think legislators need to take the same leeway with that Second Amendment right that Republican legislators have, unfortunately, with the woman's constitutional right to choose. And so one thing that I think we could do is, we need to put a pretty hefty tax on guns and ammunition to increase the cost of purchasing and owning a firearm. And by the way, that would filter down to the street level, right? If you increase the tax on a product that there's also a black market for, the black market is going to feel that as well. And there's look, my degree is economics. So, we used to say you tax something, you get less of it. But there's a great stand up by Chris Rock where he says, look, we don't need gun control. We need bullet control. We need bullets to be $5,000. Right. So that way, I guarantee you there won't be no innocent bystanders. I guarantee, folks are going to have to call Susie Orman and consult with their accountant before they go figure out if they can afford to kill somebody today. And that's somewhat comical. But the fact of the matter is, if you make it costly for someone to kill another person, there will be fewer shootings, period, point blank.
Ask your question, co-host, because I have one question.
No, go ahead.
So your one of your opponents talked about UBI And I want to know what your thoughts are on it. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if you do agree, what would be your plan if you have one? And if you disagree, why?
Yeah, I appreciate you for asking me that question. So if we go back to the start of the pandemic and Congress's response to that, before the American Rescue Plan, Congress and the executive branch basically authorized about $4.5 trillion of spending. With that money, we could have given every adult American in the country $2,025 for about 8 or 9 months consecutively, right? Which I think would have done a lot of good, because what would you have been doing? Paying people to stay home. Instead, we created extremely complicated mechanisms to get that money out into the economy, one of which I'm not fond of, which is PPP. The point of PPP supposedly was to keep people employed, keep businesses open, keep their expenses paid, like rent and utilities and so on. But there was a simpler mechanism to do that, right? If you want to make sure that working class people have money in their pockets, give it to them directly. And if you want to make sure that businesses can pay their rent and pay their utilities, why should we have a program for them that is any different than the rental assistance and utility assistance that working class people have, that the government seems to mess up and make it difficult to access anytime working class people need it? But I'm not joking about that. I'm very serious, right? So instead of these incredibly wasteful programs that pass money through businesses, that pass money through big banks, that pass money through large corporations, and basically give them free equity. That's basically what it was. Yeah. It was.
And you said pass through. I don't think it left the businesses.
well, no, but yes, exactly.
It's not like they got it and they kind of held on to it.
They sure did.
Right.
Soon,
right.
We're gonna see what they did. It was just like when they bailed out the banks, right? Like
no. Look,
they all started building buildings instead of renting. They started no banks rent anymore. So
I just want to be really clear about something. Okay. The bank bailouts, as bad as they were not as bad from the perspective of the American taxpayer and what we got in return for those dollars. They were not as bad as PPP. Why was that? How did the bank bailouts work? We didn't just hand money to banks. We bought a stake in their business. We bought preferred shares. We bought common equity. And the American government made over $100 billion off of the bank and auto bailouts, because we own shares of Citibank. We own preferred equity in Goldman Sachs. What was PPP? We literally gave business owners, large and small, empathize with the small business owners. I don't empathize with the Los Angeles Lakers that took PPP money. I don't empathize with Roots Chris and with millionaire business owners who basically took the government's money. Right, exactly. Who took the government's money and used that not just to pay their employees, but to prevent them from earning a loss during the pandemic. Who says businesses can't lose money, right? When we're in an up time in the American economy, when the economy is booming, we praise business owners as the risk takers of society. And yet every time there's a downturn, we socialize that risk and allow them to privatize that profit. So there are business owners who, while they might not be billionaires, have millions of dollars and who would not have it today were it not for the fact that they got a free government loan that was forgivable.
And I want to comment on that too, because I know, like, when you're the economist. I have an MBA, but the finance part was like not the fun part of B school for me. But they always tell us, like, make sure you have 6 months of savings, right, in case there's an emergency, right? So these folks didn't. It sounded like they didn't have not 1 month of savings, right? Because 2 months in, they were all getting all this type of money. I'm like, so you're asking regular folk that got to go to work to get their money to make sure they have 6 months of savings. Right. But these businesses weren't required to have like any of that. They were just like, it was like, we it's rough today. People not coming outside. We need money, and then they got it. So it's interesting how it's okay for the business, but like you said, it's not good for the regular American who truly would have benefited from some sort of assistance like that.
And as we can see from all these PPP loans, and so many people now are being charged with fraudulent applications, we see how that wasn't thought out fairly well. So you are for UBI or you're against it?
I am for universal basic income. I think it is a great idea. And I think the way to accomplish it, the way to finance it for people who are concerned about, well, how do you pay for it? Well, first off, you have to look at Yeah. Look, you have to look at how low tax rates are historically. The rich in America have never paid a lower share of their income, a lower share of their gains from their investments. Corporations in America have never paid a lower corporate tax rate. They have never had more loopholes in the tax code to take advantage of. These are things that have to be addressed. And for folks who say we can't afford Medicare for all, we can't afford a Green New Deal, we can't afford a universal basic income, I would just say look at the fact that Jeff Bezos, who's worth over $200 billion, okay, that means he made $1 billion 200 times. Okay, that guy paid close to 0% in federal income taxes. Why was that? Well, because his income wasn't income; it was gains on investment that were unrealized. Right. So we need a wealth tax. Right. If you're worth over $50 million, you can afford to pay 2 pennies for every dollar of basically net worth that you have over 50 million. You can afford that. Don't tell me you can't. And by the way, everybody who owns a home in this country pays a wealth tax. It's called a property tax.
Sure
we value your home and we tell you, we know this home isn't creating cash for you. We get that, but you need to find the cash from elsewhere to pay these local governments so that we can afford our public school teachers and decent salaries for them, so that we can afford our firefighters, so that we can afford to provide local services to people via local government, right? So why is it that the everyday person pays a wealth tax in the form of a property tax, but we have multi-billionaires, centibillionaires like Jeff Bezos who doesn't pay a wealth tax? So
and
that's how
because the lawmakers, right? That's why they donate to certain campaigns, and they have certain individuals that are elected to maintain, that stuff. So it's not like why we know why, you know what I mean? So what we need is that's the kind of interrupter that you need, is someone that's going to go in there and even if they are able to send enough people there, it needs to be enough voices that are opposite that, right? That's going to make that extremely difficult, that it won't be as easy as it was between 2016 and 2020 when a lot of these the tax codes got even better,
right? And I have been that interrupter, right, at the local level and at the state level. When I got into the legislature, there was a pretty intense effort on the part of members of our own caucus to, for lack of a better term, capture me, right? They kind of heard about my advocacy at the local level and about the way I approach things, and I'm a fighter, and I believe in speaking the truth, and that might make Democrats and Republicans uncomfortable, but that's what I think we need, right? And so there's this effort on the part of leadership in our caucus to convince me that when you're piping down about some injustice that you're seeing in the legislative process, that you're not selling out, you're not being silent about an injustice, that really what you're being is strategic, right? And I think that's nonsense. And I think that the proof is in the pudding. We wouldn't be down 78-42 in terms of seats held by Republicans in the Florida House versus seats held by Democrats if we were really all that strategic. The fact of the matter is, I think a lot of working class people are finding it difficult to distinguish in a meaningful way between Democrats and Republicans. And I know that there are huge differences between us, but when you don't stand up and fight for working class people, when you care more about decorum than you care about doing what is necessary to provide what working class folks need, that's when working class folks lose out. And I say all the time, Republicans are engaging in voter suppression, where they're denying working class folk, people of color, access to the ballot. But Democrats, in failing to fight effectively for working class people, are engaging in voter depression, where many working class voters are looking at us and they're looking at their options, and they're saying that they're not sure if they have a reason to cast a ballot at all. Right. So you have one party that's denying access to the ballot. You have another party that can't figure out that, hey, we need to end the filibuster, expand the Supreme Court, enshrine Roe v. Wade in federal statute. We need to make that child tax credit permanent. Right. When you fail to do those things after promising them, people have a right to say, well, why am I going to the polls? Right. So we have to address both sides of that. And I think you need an interrupter. You need a disruptor. I think we need more folks who are going to advocate as AOC and Cori Bush and others advocate, as opposed to the traditional old-fashioned way of making nice. We don't have time for that right now.
All right. So I know you're going to have to go soon, but we have a question in the chat that we have to ask. And you said you're an interrupter and you're doing you're doing good work. Some people have some concerns about the fact that you just got elected to your seat. You only been there and I suspect you've resigned already, because I think you have to resign to run. And you made a commitment to the people of that district that you were going to go there and represent them, and you ended up leaving early. And now you want folks to take another chance on you to send you to Washington, D.C. And fulfill their commitment and represent them in District 20. And I live in District 20, so yeah. I'm real invested in who it is that ends up in that seat. So why should we take a chance on you and you didn't fulfill your first commitment to the people in Palm Beach?
Well, look, I appreciate that question. Every elected official in the race has had to resign from a seat they currently have to run for this seat. Some of us have more time left in our service than others, and some of them are going to have a Republican governor appoint their successor. With respect to not finishing my term, that's true of many of the very good people who are in this race. But here's the key: I've been elected since 2017, and none of us can help when the good Lord chooses to take someone off of this earth. And I grew up in District 20 in Lauderdale Manors. I was 2 years old when Alcee Hastings won this seat in 1992. I represent a portion of this district now in West Palm Beach, where I serve in the Florida House currently. And I had to ask the question that y'all are asking: who is the best person to represent not just me, but my family? And looking at the field, I felt that the voters of Florida District 20, where I grew up, where I live now, where I represent, I feel that we deserve to have someone who's going to build on Alcee's legacy as a fighter, as a free thinker, as someone who is a disruptor, and as someone who spoke candidly and with moral clarity about the issues facing working class people. And that's why I'm in this race. And I get that some folks don't want to talk about the issues, and who don't want to really get down to brass tacks about how they're going to help working class people. Maybe want to mention the fact that I'm young, or the fact that this happened shortly after my term in the Florida House started. But at the end of the day, democracy is about voters having options to choose and then making that choice. So I'm going to go out campaign. We're going to talk about issues. We're going to talk about what we're going to do for working class people and how we're going to change America so that it works better for people of color, for marginalized communities. And we're going to let the rest of the chips fall wherever they may.
All right. So focus on the issues, not the time that you spent as a representative.
I think the issues are what matter most. But, if you're going to focus on my time as a representative, look at the work that I've done. I have, had the fortune of serving people who have trusted me. I have worked really, really hard to give working class people a voice. And so if you want to talk about the time that I spent in office, you have a plethora of examples of where I put it on the line, taking political risks, risk really my political career to do what was right, no matter what the consequences.
So there's another question about can you give an example of where you had to work across the aisle to get someone of the other party to agree on some issue or legislation or policy that you were putting forward?
Yeah, no, look, I'll give you two quick examples. One, I worked with Representative Wyman Duggan to pass House Bill 487, which was a bill that put more power in our local governments and basically allowed them to make planning decisions for their communities without having to ask, bureaucrats in a remote capital like Tallahassee for permission about how to do that. Reached across the aisle. We passed that legislation in my first year. Also, in addition to that, it's very difficult for a freshman Democrat to get appropriations out of the budget. But I believe I got what is the largest single appropriation of any freshman Democrat, in the caucus, which was $1 million for the public safety complex at Riviera Beach for our firefighters and police officers. You don't get that without being able to work across the aisle. In addition to that, I'll tell you this: Republicans, they might be annoyed by me. But the fact of the matter is, when you bring issues up in committee that they know are going to be problems for them, they have to address it. And I did that with the voter suppression bill. I was on the last committee that voter suppression bill came to. And I don't know if you recall, but the original version of that bill would have required, if you hand your ballot to somebody to drop off at the drop box, it would have required you to print out and sign an affidavit specifying that that is the person who gets to drop off your ballot. And then that person would have had to carry an ID to the drop box, and the drop box would have had to be manned, and that person would have to check their ID and make sure that that's their person. And then if they didn't have an ID, or if they didn't have the affidavit, your ballot would not be accepted, right? And so in committee, a lot of people say, oh, you know, you're really upset the Republicans, you don't work well with them. I gave Blaise Ngolia, the representative who was carrying that bill, I gave him hell for a period of time during questioning, and said, why is it that we should basically be canceling people's ballots because of who brought the ballot to the ballot box? And they recognized that that was going to be a problem. And when they brought that bill to the floor, that provision was not in it. And he noted that on the floor of the House, right? And so there are a lot of folks who are going to say, oh, he doesn't work well with Republicans. You know, he's new to this. But the fact of the matter is, I'm looking at folks who have been in politics since I was in high school, and in some cases earlier. And it's not as if they have this tremendously long resume of changing and transforming the communities where I grew up and so on. And it's my belief that if this is going to be about issues, it should be about issues, and it shouldn't be about style. And what I see is people making stylistic, kind of criticisms and couching them as issues about can you reach across the aisle and so on and so forth. The proof is in the pudding, and my record on that is very clear.
All right.
Yeah,
So
everyone who started, they started with probably very little experience. So
and my final thing, so we gotta let you go, is I'm a little bit concerned, Rep. I'm concerned that there's so many people running and there's so many seats that are going to be vacant, and we already have no numbers. So are you concerned about that? I know you have to resign to run. I know your seat's going to be open. And the other thing too is representation matters. And I know you mentioned about, not all Black people need to be in high places, but I do believe that Black people need to have seats. We need to have seats. We need to have people at the table. So are you concerned that there's so many of you guys running in this district, and a lot of you guys are we're losing really.
Half the field, I think, had to resign to run. I think almost half of the losing Democratic field. Yeah,
and we're losing prominent, good representatives and senators in seats that we already need. So are you concerned about that, or do you maybe have some inside information you can share with us that there are people in the wings waiting to take those seats that will be vacant?
Yeah, look, I am concerned about that, but we had a conversation about symptoms versus systems. Mm-hmm. And the systemic issue behind all of this is the fact that every poor and working class Black person in Broward and Palm Beach counties, we've been drawn into a single district. And what that means is that there are people who really have a heart and passion for public service who, by the magic of gerrymandering, are given just one opportunity to serve their community in a place that they feel they can be most effective, right? So the systemic issue has to be addressed. And by the way, we address that by electing good people to Congress who are going to fight to pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which would ban this kind of gerrymandering that has every poor and working class Black person between two of the most populous counties in the state of Florida drawn into one district. That's the systemic issue. Now, as far as the symptoms, of course, folks are, resigning to, run for this seat. I believe that we have a deep, bench of Black leaders, in all of our communities in Palm Beach County. That's where we all came from. So I believe long term, we are going to see things work out. What I would just say is, long term things are going to work out, but we should focus on the systematic issue of the fact that we're all drawn into a single district.
Yeah, and then the fact that people are leaving, that because this year, with the census, and they're gonna redraw those lines again. And we have folks that are not gonna be there to have any say so, at least in that conversation. Even though maybe the Republicans are still gonna do what they're gonna do, but there are a lot of very good voices that are gonna be gone as a result of running for this seat.
Well, as I plug in my laptop, which was about to die on me, I'll just say this: the people of color, and this is just the unfortunate truth, the people of color who tend to make it onto the redistricting committees tend to be folks who the Republicans have, because the Republican Speaker of the House chooses all the committee assignments, right? So those folks who make it onto the redistricting committees very often are chosen by Republicans because they know there are going to be aiders and abettors in helping the Republicans achieve their agenda, and to help them gerrymander. A lot of people don't realize this issue that we're facing with gerrymandering goes back to 1992, when a certain congresswoman who is no longer a member of Congress from the Jacksonville area was offered a seat if she would help Republicans, gerrymander these districts to give them somewhat of an advantage. And that happened. And that's what created the seat that originally went from Jacksonville to Orlando to Apopka, that now goes between Jacksonville and Tallahassee. And it also allowed the Republicans to take the majority, which they did just 4 short years later, right? And so again, we got to address the gerrymandering issue. We shouldn't have elected officials choosing their voters. It should be the other way around.
Yeah, and so the voters do have a right to do have a choice in who they send to represent them. So they just need, and that's why we have these conversations, so people can know who they are, what you're about, and so they'll make better decisions in terms of who they give that those jobs to, right? And we definitely have to really focus on people really knowing who it is that they're voting for and who it is that they're sending to represent them. So we do have control of that. We do have control of that.
So how can you be reached, Rep? Send us what's your Congress email so we can post it in the chat. So people can reach out.
Yeah. I mean, if it's about political stuff, you can email me at info@omarihardy.com, info@omarihardy.com. And if it's about state legislative matters, or you need help with state benefits or anything like that, email me in my office, omari.hardy@myfloridahouse.gov. We're very happy to help you out with stuff like that. It doesn't matter what district you're from or what have you. We've helped folks in Miami with unemployment and with getting business licenses and things like that. So yeah, I would be happy to be of service to anyone who reaches out to our office.
All right. So if people want to get involved in your campaign,
info@omarihardy.com.
So if they want to donate,
and if you would like to learn more about us, or if you would like to donate, go to omarihardy.com, omarihardy.com. Learn about me, learn about the issues that the platform that I'm running on. We'll continue to add more there. I think we have almost a dozen issues up there, or maybe close to 10. I'm not sure, but there'll be more. And click that donate button. We are not taking money from corporate PACs. We are not taking money from federal lobbyists. This is a people-powered campaign. We want to go into Congress unowned and unbought by any special interest. That is the most important thing for us.
Tell us why you don't want to take money from federal lobbyists.
Oh, because federal lobbyists are trying to influence you to pass policies that their clients want you to pass. And so, when you take money from a lobbyist, they expect you to pick up that phone a little more quickly. And that's something that, by the way, people underestimate that at the state level. It is very, so I've had to make that decision because I've seen how that works at the state level, where corporations can give directly to people's campaigns and people's PACs. And there's an expectation that you're going to be more accessible, that you're going to bend your ear a little harder to them when they're talking with you about the issues. And I just can't really put up with that. And I don't want to set anybody up to be disappointed. And I don't want to disappoint anybody. Yeah.
Well, thank you for explaining lobbyists, because, other candidates came there and I was completely confused about what lobbyists are. So your definition and other candidates' definition is like they don't match up. But I will do my research and make sure to make sense out of nonsense, because what you're saying sounds like what a lobbyist is, but then I was explained that lobbyist was something else. So I got
that. And then we had another one who said they taking money from anybody because it don't matter because they're their own man and no one can make them do anything just because
I was
donated to their campaign.
Yeah.
Look, I know we got a candidate forum in 20 minutes, but first of all, that reminds me of that scene in The Wire. I don't know if y'all watched that.
Yes,
with the state senator, he's like, I'll take anybody's money if they're giving it away, right? That's not the way we should operate. And so, and by the way, beyond not taking money from corporate PACs or federal lobbyists, I don't take money from, executives of fossil fuel companies, Wall Street banks, so on and so forth, even though it's personal money. Again, what my goal is to not have anybody to be able to say that you're beholden to a special interest, and certainly not to become beholden to that special interest. We all believe that, we are above the kind of soft corruption that has paralyzed Congress right now, where people are not getting paid directly by these special interests, but the special interests are funding their campaign, which allows them to continue to be elected and continue to be important and build their self-esteem. It's not corruption, it's soft corruption. We all think that we can be above that, but we're not above human nature. And at the end of the day, there are safeguards that we have to put in place. And the safeguard that we have chosen to put in place at Omari Hardy for Congress is that we're not taking money from people who are essentially trying to buy access and influence. That's not healthy. It's not safe. It's anti-democratic. And in my opinion, we need to get money out of politics entirely and publicly fund our elections.
All right. Well, thank you.
Let's end on that one. That was good stuff.
That was good stuff. Well, really, thank you so much for coming. You know we got to run. We're going to let you go because we do a recap after every interview. But thank you so much for coming. I learned a lot today, and I wish you good luck in your campaign.
And so the forum that you're going to be on is by the Broward County Jewish Caucus, right? And I think they're going to be on Facebook, and it starts at 6:30.
Yes. We will be moseying on over to go watch that as well. But we wish you good luck. We appreciate your time. It was a great interview, and we thank you very much. Anything else, Sandra?
No, that's it. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Good luck.
Yes.
All right. So, I mean,
okay.
Like, so what's your recap, sis? What's your recap?
I think he is interested in doing work for working class folks. He's gonna have to deal with when he talks about what he wants to do with the immigrant population. Part of that's gonna have to do with immigration reform. He's gonna have to take a position, make it real public about what his thoughts are on immigration, and he's going to run into some issues with that, because some of the things that he was talking about, that community in Lake Worth, I completely understand it. They can have documentation. It's just like they don't want Migrant to know that they're here, and so they're living, so that I understand that. So that's really an immigration issue. And so I understand the ID thing, but I also knew that state government couldn't issue those IDs.
Absolutely not. Right.
And then again, and because I have like the immigration background, the idea that they don't have documentation and all of that. So some of what I do know that happens is like as they're traveling to come into the United States, they usually don't want to have documentation on them for all different types of reasons. So by the time they get here, they probably don't have their passport or they don't have their birth certificate, but they know how to get it, right? So either they left it at home, and sometimes I think by now they know to just kind of leave it at home and not travel with it, as opposed to, initially when people were traveling that way, some people would actually throw it away on their, or, I shouldn't say throw it away. They say they lose it in the travel because the journey is long. So that's part of it. So that what he wants to do for the immigrant population, I do understand that. And I also know that some of the banks, because what was also happening is that, they're not allowed to work, but they work anyway. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then they're getting paid in cash. And then, they have no social security number, so they can't put the money in the bank. And then that was causing some level of violence too. And I know that I particularly know this when you're talking about the Mexican population in Homestead, in Dade County. And so what some of the banks did was they implemented policies where it's not a real social security number, but they'll create a social security number that that allow them to at least open up a bank account, right? So that's part of what's happening, because there was, people were, they would get checks and they can't cash them, and then they would trust someone to cash it for them, and then they'd get robbed. And so it was a real issue. So the banks did figure out a way to allow them to open accounts regardless of the fact they have social security number. And then the other point I want to make to that is Social Security also now issues numbers, but on the card it says that the person is not allowed to work unless they have work authorization. So there are ways for folks, undocumented folks, to get a social security number in order for them to conduct, business, without them actually having a number that allows them to work. So there are there's some on a federal level things were done to address that particular issue. Yeah.
So I particularly like him talking about the how the UBI, because I think that's a very important thing, and the last few candidates we spoke to, for the most part, it seems that there is some sort of consensus that UBI is needed, right? And I think that where they differ is how it's going to be funded. So I agree with him. And when he mentioned about the $4 trillion and that, people could have gotten, every adult American got $2,000-something consecutively for a certain amount of months or whatever.
And that would have made a difference. I think that would have really helped with the pandemic.
That would have been a real difference. But he didn't say that he had any plans for it. What he said was that he liked it, he agreed with it, and then he think that it was something that should be done. So he didn't really kind of, say if he had any plans for it. The other thing is, which is one of the big issues that people have with his campaign, is the fact that he hasn't been, he gets elected, but he doesn't stay long. He goes on to the next thing. So his response was, it's more about, what did he say?
It's calling to do good work.
But he said something else. He said something to the effect of, it's not about the quantity, but the quality. I think it was something.
No, it's about the issues. He said it shouldn't be about that.
It shouldn't be about the time frame.
It's not about the time that.
The systematic. He said something about the systematic issues.
So that was when he was saying why, because. So that was okay. So what I think he was trying to say was that the reason why there's so many people running for this particular seat is because the way they've set it up is that almost all of Black people live in District 20, like all the working class Black people, whoever. Most of the Black people in Broward and Palm Beach County live in that district, and so that's why you have so many people trying to run for this seat, because this is an opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. So he said so the reason why you have like 11 Democrats and all these people running now is because it's the fault of the folks who designed the map and put all of the Black people in this one district. Had we been sprinkled, maybe all throughout the county or the state, then it wouldn't be so many people running for one particular seat. Because I think what he also understands is that the person who wins now most likely will continue to win, short of them doing something ridiculous, right? Or them deciding that they no longer want the gig and they want to maybe run for a Senate seat or take on another position. So I think that's why people are saying, you know what, I need to do it now, because if this is the gig you want, this is the time to try to get it, because if you get it now, the chances of you continuing to win is a lot higher than trying to run against somebody else. So I think that was part of the thought process, and that's how I understood the response that he gave, right? Okay. But sometimes we criticize folks who say, don't worry about that, let's stick to the issue, because it's like they don't want to talk about it because the talking about it is not good for them, right? And right. I don't want to go and say that that's what he did, but oftentimes when I hear those kind of responses, to me it's like, okay, let's not talk about that, let's stick to the issues, because the conversation is not a comfortable one for you or not a good one for you. So, but overall, I mean, I like his, what it is that he's saying that he wants to do for
Me too.
working class folks.
He's all about the people.
He said everybody shooting their shot. That's
what
it is. You gotta. Hey.
Yep. Everybody's and listen, like you say, we ain't dream killers out here. So you want to shoot your shot. You know what I'm saying? He did talk a good game. He did talk about working class people. He did talk about not taking money from lobbyists and special interests. I thought that was very important that he made that distinction. And I appreciated him, breaking down that information, because I was, I'm learning, about lobbyists, and I know that I learned from you too about what lobbyists do and what
he usually not we the people.
Yeah, and what he was saying,
we the people.
Me. Yeah, so his explanation aligns with what you explained to me, what lobbyists were, and so I because of that, I don't really like lobbyists per se, because it's more for corporations and businesses rather than the people. So I appreciated that part. He appears to be someone who really wants to do work for the people. And I appreciated that. I appreciate him asking the questions that Stephanie had in terms of what have you done, what are you doing, because it's important. People need to understand that this person, whoever gets that will work, across the party lines. It seems like he has a little friction with the Republicans, but I think some friction is good friction.
It needs to be, especially this group of Republicans. It needs to be friction.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
Like, no, we fighting.
I feel like, I think he wants all.
Especially, I mean, the group that was in the last legislative session, please, they don't play nice. You can't fight the fight you're in. They're not playing nice. So what we being nice to you for? That's what I'm out here declaring war.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
So he hasn't been. He's had some friction. We were able to watch stuff, debates and stuff like that, and he didn't mince no words when it was his time to talk. So. He brought all the smoke. He said he wanted all, and he took it. So, I'm pleased.
Yeah, and the one thing I think I do appreciate that he said was that he said, you know, we're not above human nature. And so we need to have some safeguards in place so we don't fall for some of that soft corruption, right? Like that speaks volume, right? Like we don't want to be like we big and bad and like, you know, nah, I ain't gonna be tempted, right? But if there's a way to kind of just not put that temptation in your face, then you know, absolutely, I'm not mad at it. You know what I mean?
I agree.
I'm not mad at it. So
I think that this was the most transparent, in my opinion, interview we had thus far. I know he kind of it seemed like he wanted to skirt away about the time frame he's been in office for, you know, his seats. But other than that,
it's understandable.
And I get it. But other than that, I think he did pretty good. I ain't gonna lie, it was pretty good shot. And then we did have some hot moments because you was like, well, wait a minute now, let's talk about that
immigrant question. No, because that listen, like, come on, that you know, don't be. You can't like avoid the law because you ain't trying to get caught. That's like, right. You know, like you aiding like criminals. And so, but he did say he don't think it should be a crime that people enter the United States unlawfully, right? Which I mean, I agree. You know what I'm saying? But it is a federal offense. It's a federal offense to enter the United States unlawfully. You know, and then when you get here, because you know there's consequences when you choose not to let immigration know that you're here. And I understand the fear. I completely understand the fear. And so once if you don't want to tell them you're here, that's right. You're gonna have no ID and no work authorization.
Yeah, right? You don't want to tell them you're here. You shouldn't be behind nobody's wheel either driving.
You definitely like that right there, please. Like you. And that's for anybody, you know. You ain't got no driver's license because again,
driving nobody's car.
And because I do deal with immigrant populations, some of them they at least have an international driver's license. So,
So you know what? We have our next interview with Bobby DeBose,
Gator Nation.
Tomorrow. It's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Gator Nation.
Yep, Gator Nation. We're gonna have a nice conversation with him. I'm excited to see him and talk to him. And then we have confirmed Dowling.
Dowling for
is on the 8th. Okay. That's next week, and then Barbara Sharif is on the 10th.
Which is Friday at 5. It's on a Friday night, but you know she had some conflicts on the 8th, had some budget stuff that she needed to do on the 9th, and she's available on Friday the 10th, and we're gonna be here for her. Right, and we're gonna round it out. We tried to reach out to Miss Taylor. Miss Priscilla Taylor. We haven't heard back, and we're gonna watch the Jewish Democrats and send her a message, be like, holla at us. Yeah, we're gonna do that. So she's gonna be on there. We're gonna have an opportunity to finally see her and talk and see what she's about. Gotta say. Send her a message like, come talk to us, please. We're gonna be like, well, what happened, sis? We want to talk to you too. She said we're awesome, and Alfredo said a great interview. Thank you, Alfredo. Thank you, Alfredo. Oh, yes. And Alfredo is monitoring I think he's doing there's a big forum that a lot of the Democratic clubs are doing on September the 26th. He's the moderator. Alfredo is the moderator for that. Yes. And Alfredo is the president of the Dolphin Democrats. Yes. So he will be moderating listen. That's going to be a big one because I think a lot of the clubs are involved in that one, and that's probably the most well-attended event. Absolutely. All right, so we're going to mosey on over to the Jewish caucus. Broward Democratic Jewish Caucus. The Broward Democrat, is it Broward or just the Jewish Caucus? It's Broward. Oh, okay, it's Broward. Okay. Yes. So Broward Democratic Jewish Caucus. We're gonna head on, mosey on over there on Facebook and see and kind of follow along. So if you guys want to join us, go ahead and slip on over. But remember to like, share, subscribe if you're on YouTube. Remember to like our page and share it on Facebook. All right. So we'll see you all over there on the flip side. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow is Bobby DeBose. All right. 5:00. Gator Nation. Let's see what he better represent that orange and blue well. That's all I'm saying. I got no time to play with him.
We'll see Bobby DuBose tomorrow.
Okay, because I've been like, here, you know, like
if you're watching Mr. DuBose, she said you need to bring it and share.
Represent the University of Florida well.
Okay, so make sure you bring it and talk about your Gator Nation. All right.
That's right.
So we'll see you all tomorrow at 5, and head over to the Broward Jewish Caucus on Facebook. You can find them and see the candidate form. All 11 candidates will be there tonight.
Okay.
All right, everyone.